Hey everyone, I'm here with Alex today, better known as Shaka1277 on YouTube. Thanks for joining, Alex. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. And thank you very much for having me. This is a really cool thing to be asked to be a part of. Thank you. Yeah.
Hey,
I'm
it's my
tired.
pleasure.
It's like 10 p.m. here at the moment, so coffee to keep me going as you're having your morning coffee. But
Yeah,
yeah, really appreciate being here.
yeah, it's a big time difference. I think 11 hours. Anyway, I've been admiring your channel for a long time, and especially your expertise and chemistry and like just your dedication to the DIY side of things, which I think is quite rare. So, just to start with, give me and the audience a bit of a background of how you got into both film photography and then sharing your passion on YouTube for the chemistry side of things, especially.
Okay. Yeah, so the short version is I got into photography in general when I was 14, 15 years old. I was very sick around that time and I had a digital point and shoot camera, so I was just taking pictures around the garden, that kind of thing. And that stayed with me for a long time. I eventually got into a DSLR, and that I had a Nikon D90 for like 11 years. I have a PhD in chemistry, and when I was writing up my PhD thesis, I was reading through the abstracts and introductions of various papers, and one of them just casually mentioned it was about a reaction using silver salts. The mentioned the use of silver one salts in photography, and that caught my attention. So that was at like 11 in the morning, and then I ended up going down a rabbit hole, learning a little bit about how photography worked because I'd never really thought about the chemistry behind film, and I got no work done that day in the end. So that was quite interesting. But then I committed to not starting with film until I finished my PhD and got a job because I know myself well enough to know I would get in way too deep, way too quickly, and I needed to be able to afford and fund that. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, like everyone else, I was running off Netflix and YouTube and everything, binging as much content as I could. And one of the cameras I was using at the time was a Pentax 6.7. And I realized that there wasn't really a lot out there except for people talking about that 105 f2.4. If you wanted to look at some of the more obscure lenses, there was really very little discourse out there. One of them in particular, the 45 mil, is kind of like a one of those X-pan alternative lenses if you were to use it with 35 mil film in the Pentax 6.7. And at the time, there were two reviews, one of which was in Spanish and one which was just like a POV video clip. So there was really nothing out there except on forums, some of which were locked behind accounts. And I just kind of figured I have the lens. I could be the person to start talking about these kind of lesser discussed topics. And then in, I think, 2021, I started, making some photography videos and I kind of revived my old YouTube channel and just went with it from there. And it's kind of stayed that way for the most part, talking about things that not necessarily everybody talks about. Like, people joke about Portra 400 in an M6. That's not going to be me. I'm going to be the guy who's more talking about the M5 potentially or something like that. The not so much black sheep, but like the less common things. Like I got rid of my Hasselblad kit last year, which was a 2000 series, not even a standard 500, and replaced it with a Rolleiflex SL66, which is a very strange camera, but not many people talk about it. So it's kind of useful that I can share whatever information I can find out about these things. And just, I try to be that guy where you probably won't find my videos, but if you have some really specific query, I will hopefully be able to answer it perfectly.
Yeah. And I've noticed on our Discord server, you've kind of become the guy who answers a lot of people's technical questions. And that does seem to me to be your expertise is in the technical realm of things. And the way I discovered your videos was probably through one of the wacky things you do with film, like taking Harman Phoenix and then processing it as E6 or pushing it a various amount of different stops in either direction and stress testing film, so to speak, or talking about the things that, like you said, people don't normally do. But then I did discover that you had your channel for such a long time and that you were doing stuff like how to load a Pentax 6.7 the easy way or whatever. So it was really cool to see that you had this like interest for a long time. And I feel like a lot of people would discover your stuff when you do talk about something like, let's say, Harman Phoenix, where it is trending at the time because it's a new film, which is an exciting thing,
Yeah.
something we can talk about more. Did you notice that you connected more with the community after that point, like you said, around COVID when you were making videos about Phoenix and stuff?
Phoenix was definitely a major turning point for me. Like I had some community engagement, before then, but that was kind of the real tipping point where in various groups on Discords or Facebook groups or even just in person at events, people started to recognize me and come up to me. And that was a
Yeah.
really strange experience. I'm sure, like, even now when you're hosting events, it's nice when people come up to you, but like, I was really taken aback. One time I was in London with one of my friends, and he was shopping for a new bag for a trip, and a guy across the store, like, fully pointed at me, like, slack jawed, and came over and introduced himself. And that was the first time that had ever happened, and that was all post Phoenix. I have seen a good bit of growth since then. Like, the stuff I do is quite niche. It's not very sexy content for the most part, so it's not going to blow up, and that's not what I'm really going for. My
Yeah.
I'm not a very confident person. I try to be useful, if not entertaining. Like, that's just kind of the angle that I try to take with all this stuff. And yeah, ever since like really doing everything with Phoenix, I've started getting a lot of messages out of the blue on various platforms from people asking, things like, I accidentally shot it at 1,000. What do I do to try and salvage something from it?
Hmm.
And I'll give people advice, and then at least with Phoenix, usually it kind of works out.
Yeah. Well, there's not many PhD chemist film shooting, YouTubers out there. So I'm sure it's like really valuable information to a lot of people. And I can relate to that, what you mentioned about people recognizing you. And it is a very humbling thing, I think, I would hope for most people when that happens. And it's what I think makes it worthwhile for me is knowing that people are enjoying the stuff. And I think you have plenty of confidence and especially competence in what you present, and the way you present to me is quite entertaining as well. Like, you have this kind of wittiness about you that I find makes the somewhat dry information more digestible, if that makes any sense. Because talking about silver
Okay.
halides and curves and all these things, it's like not the most exciting, like you said, but you seem to make it interesting because of your passion behind it. I can sense when you're talking about these things that you are really into it, and if it wasn't for that, I don't think it would work.
Yeah, I get that. Without some kind of passion and excitement, and I definitely get that people feel that excitement in some of my videos. And that, if that weren't there, it would basically just be like presenting a PowerPoint presentation. At which
Very
point
much
you're just
so.
going to lose people, especially with this really niche stuff. But yeah, I still have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
And the more it's like a Dunning-Kruger kind of thing, the more I learn about film photography, the more I realize I have no idea what's going on
Yeah,
to a
well,
certain degree.
that keeps things going upwards, I guess, and improving over time,
Yeah,
and you don't rest on your
definitely.
laurels, so to speak. Now, one thing I think that we're both quite excited to talk about, and it may end up being what we dwell on the most through this chat, we'll see, is the recent announcement from Light Lens Lab in that they're making a black and white film, or they're attempting, or I think they have a test product already. Let's talk about that. What are your thoughts so far on their new black and white emulsion that they put out there?
I think it's a really smart move. It's the same stuff I've been saying with, the likes of Flick Film and other companies respooling films to make them available in markets where they're not typically available, or the obvious example, Harman Phoenix. I have been called Ireland's greatest Harman shill by some people. But just, Fujifilm are more or less out of the game.
Yeah.
They've gotten back into it a bit, and there is some restoration of supply there, but it's just two consumer grade 200 and 400 speed films. It's nothing like the breadth of the superior range that what there was a couple of years before I got into photography. So having honestly just literally anyone other than Kodak getting into it is fantastic. I know Orwo and Innoviscope do a lot of stuff, but there have been a lot of issues there as well. I don't know if maybe they went too hard too quickly and they weren't able to sustain the growth that they had. But even just for black and white for now, to see what the guys from Light Lens Lab, whatever they end up naming their film brand, come out with, it's really exciting. And I think going for a tabular grain film, so for anyone who's watching this and hasn't seen the announcement, they've announced they're going to start with a 100 speed T grain film in 35 and 120. And I think going for T grain rather than cubic grain there is a really smart move because, one, it's a bit more unique. There are only six T grain films, seven T grain films on the market, the three Delta films, the three T Max films, and Fomapan 200, which is a blend of tabular and cubic grains. And being a T grain film has different advantages. I don't want to take up too much of your time by getting into all of that, but one of the bigger things is that you get similar image quality and density by using less silver, which increases economy and makes the film cheaper to manufacture. But also, the Light Lens Lab gang are planning to make color films down the line, and color films use tabular grain technology. So that will give them expertise that can directly feed into their goals to produce color films down the line.
And Acros is not a T grain, is it? The Acros and the current
I think
Acros 2
Acros is
emulsion
cubic grain. Acros
is a
1,
cubic.
I'm pretty sure, is 2. I've never checked, but I think from the style of the images I've seen that it is cubic grain.
Yeah.
I've
And
seen enough pictures
generally,
of Acros developed in Rodinal that weren't awful that I imagine it's probably cubic.
yeah. And they seem to have a smoother grain appearance, generally speaking, as well, in my experience.
Mm.
Sharper, maybe, or the appearance of more sharpness as
Yeah,
well.
higher acutance. Yeah.
Accutance, yeah. So I guess what we know so far is that it's a 100 speed, it's a T grain, it's a Light Lens Lab. They haven't given the film company name yet, but they have a working prototype that they've shot some images on. Maybe I'll put them
Yeah.
up on the screen. So what does that mean in terms of their capability with manufacturing and equipment and coating and all that stuff that I have very little knowledge about?
I know a bit more than I can probably say, but I know they have been
Okay.
working on this for a while, and they do have a full coding line that they're developing, and that has been going well. So, in terms of actual manufacturing capability, it seems like they have the capacity beyond just like a small scale test. So, I know in Harman Technology for Ilford and Harman films, they have like they're obviously their large scale manufacturing and coding line, but they also have a small scale line where they'll do I think like 5 meter runs of a film just to see like how the process physically works on a smaller scale without committing to thousands or tens of thousands of pounds worth of material.
Mm.
And I don't know what scale they're working at with the Light Lens Lab film, whatever it ends up being called. I think we can just say that like we don't know the name of the film brand yet, but it means they've got the technology to design and crystallize the silver halides, generate the T grain crystals, actually control the particle size in a way that suits what they want. They've got sensitizer technology because the silver halides are only naturally sensitive to UV and blue light, so you need to use organic sensitizing dyes that can basically see yellow, green, red light and actually transfer that energy into the silver halide crystal, kind of chemically exposing it in much the same way as the chemical reversal step in an E6 would, rather than exposing it to light like a black and white reversal or most black and white reversal. And then they've obviously got the technology to blend the emulsion with whatever else they have in there, various types of. You probably don't. I don't think you have DIR couplers or anything like that in black and white, but they have at least one, emulsion layer. Most black and white films don't do split speed layers like a high speed and low speed, as far as I know. They probably have an anti-scratch layer, anti-curling layer. The prototype images don't have an anti-halation layer. That's something
That's
they
right.
left out, but they said they will have an anti-halation layer in the production film, which is probably a good move if they're going for a wider audience. I know a lot of people like glowy films. One of my recent videos was on Foma Ortho 400, which doesn't have an anti-halation layer in 120, and it's super bloomy.
Mm.
But that's not something that is going to appeal to a lot of people.
Yeah,
And then I think I mentioned the anti-scratch layer. I mean, black
you
and white
did.
film is relatively simple by comparison. You've got the base, at least an anti-curling layer, emulsion layer, anti-scratch layer, maybe a UV filter depending on the emulsion. It's not as complex as color, but you're still talking about passing this master roll that you're developing layer by layer through the same coating line, adding stuff up bit by bit.
Mm.
And one of the things that Harman faced with Harman Phoenix was the defect rate. If you have one speck per meter of film, that will ruin that piece of film potentially. If you pass the same thing through the coating machine like 5 or 6 times, you're more likely to end up with ruined pieces of film. So the defect rate adds up considerably. So they're obviously going to have to work on minimizing the defect rate to maximize their yield. In the same way, you'd be looking at things like um, CPU manufacturing, where they're looking at the yield of like, this core doesn't work, so that's going to be an i5 rather than an i7 or whatever. And I know that
Right.
naming scheme is dead, but there's a lot of, beside the chemical stuff, the like physical manufacturing side is obviously very difficult. And of course, it all has to be done in the dark. You can't
Yeah.
inspect any of the stuff by eye. You're going to have to stop the machines, sacrifice whatever batch you're working on if you need to stop and look at it for any reason. And that's problematic in its own right.
Yeah. So needless to say, there's a lot of like hurdles and difficulties to overcome. It almost reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen when they were launching the James Webb Space Telescope, how there's all these failure points. There's a scientific probably term for it, where there's like, if one thing goes wrong, basically the whole thing doesn't work. I guess a lot of people listening might be quite interested in the, I guess, the implications for the film community. Like, let's assume or presume that this is going to work out. So, yeah, I guess what are your thoughts on the likelihood, number one, of this succeeding, what it means for the community at large, having another film manufacturer with the capability to then go on to do color? They must have bought the equipment from another manufacturer, meaning like, do they have recipes, so to speak, or formulas or data from past, company? Usually they have to have something to work off. Like Ferrania, for example, had that historical information to work off. Like,
Yeah,
what are
and
the
famously,
implications at
when
large?
Polaroid died, they took all their recipes with them. So the
Yeah.
Impossible Project, as it was at the time, had to kind of reverse engineer everything. I'm not sure what, if anything, Light Lens Lab were able to get in terms of recipes and the like, but I think it's very likely, given the time scale of this, as far as I knew about it, and that they had something to work off and they weren't going completely from scratch ab initio. And in terms of equipment, yeah, as far as I know, like this equipment hasn't been manufactured in decades at this point. Like
Mm.
even before the financial crisis, what, 18 years ago, like the machines were aging then. So now I don't know what it is. And if there is someone out there making at least parts for these machines to get them up and running, that would be amazing, not just for Light Lens Lab, but also for people like Ferrania who are having lots of problems trying to get the old machines back up and running because they basically came back to an abandoned old factory. In terms of the likelihood, I think it will succeed because, they're working in a very, I don't want to say advantaged economy, but like financially very competitive economy on the global scale. So they're going to have a lot of advantages in terms of economies of scale and keeping their costs down, especially again using T grain film
Yeah.
to reduce the silver costs, which is one of the biggest costs in producing a film. Like there's relatively not that much silver in a film, but of the material costs, it's one of the more expensive things. Yeah, like there are certain. Look at the difference between Kentmere 400 and HP5. The main difference between them spec wise is the silver content, and for most applications, they're more or less equivalent. But Kentmere comes in at a lower price point because there's less silver in the emulsion. So that gives them a big advantage going for the T grain. And as I said, it gives them a leg up on preparing and blending T grain emulsions for the production of color film down the line. They were even talking about bringing back peel apart film, which is a very lofty goal. I'm not sure how likely those kind of things are because it is exponentially more complicated to do this than it is to prepare a black and white film. I mean, look at the Harman Phoenix project. I mean, Ilford have the better part of 150 years of experience producing black and white film. And then when they spun up the Harman Photo brand, it took them now a year, as I said before, talking about this film is basically no time at all to produce anything at the corporate level. But producing Harman Phoenix in just a year was incredible. But it's still going to be a long way to get to something like Kodak Gold, Ultramax, Portra 400, to these higher spec films. It's a lot easier, I would say, to go from nothing to black and white than from black and white to color, because
Yeah.
I would say a lot more of the challenges to produce a black and white film could be solved on the engineering side, which is comparatively simpler than the immense breadth of chemistry that goes into generating a color film. Like I was recently rereading about how the need to use the same developer for all three color layers in a color film limits the choice of dyes that you can use in such a way that we are forced to have the orange mask. Like the orange mask in a color negative film is only there to cover inaccuracies or impurities in the dyes that we actually form with the developer. And there's a whole thing about that. Like the amount of stuff you have to think about is absolutely crazy. Like I don't want to go too deep into it because I couldn't talk about anything with any confidence or you know too
Yeah.
concisely and end up going on forever. But I think they will pull off the black and white, and then I'm hopeful to see what they do down the line. But in the same way as Ferrania, we're hoping to come out with E6 film, pretty much by now, which hasn't happened. We've only got three black and white films out of them: P30, Orto, and P33.
Mm.
Um, I think the goals that some of these people have are quite lofty. But I do think that a 100 speed tabular grain film at a price cheaper than Delta 100 and T-Max 100, even if it's not as good, if the price is right, people will buy it.
Yeah, I absolutely think they'll buy it. And thanks for sharing all that knowledge as well. I guess like all that is to say that this is definitely a good thing for the future of film, even the fact that they're attempting it, whether or not they succeed in every one of their like lofty or audacious kind of goals, like Peel Apart, for example, it's definitely a good thing, and just to kind of keep film alive. I think that's a good chance
Absolutely.
also to pivot back. You mentioned Harman Phoenix and how big of an achievement that was. You and I were both testers or reviewers, I guess, for Harman Phoenix, and we were both, I think, from the standpoint of being quite impressed. Maybe because I don't know, like I tested it quite later, and I learned a bit of the stuff from your video and other reviewers. Do you still think it's as good as we both kind of expressed in our videos?
I don't want to get in trouble by saying anything too inflammatory, but I have been known to say things to the effect of Harmon Phoenix is the best not so good film you can buy. Like,
Yeah,
of all of the films that aren't your Portra 400, which is your gold standard, it has the most impact, I would say. I mean, okay, it's not as good a film as Kodak Gold. Kodak Gold is just Kodak Gold. I say it in basically every video where I talk about Phoenix. Phoenix is more about what the project represents. It is a pre-alpha essentially. It's not the final release. It's not even close to the final release. But the project was so successful that it was a key part in Harman Technology Limited getting that multi-million pound investment last year so that they could expand their coding line and install a second set of everything to massively improve their ability to actually produce film at scale.
yeah,
And if that keeps going, then I can totally imagine them expanding the Mobberley plant to have like an entire dedicated color section for manufacturing where they might be able to tweak the equipment in some way that makes it better for that. I don't know. I've never visited the site, but as much as Phoenix has its technical limitations, I am so incredibly familiar with that film now. This is something I spoke about in my first video of this year, that I can look at a scene and know how it's going to come out on Phoenix. I'll know what's going to be retained in the shadows and the highlights because I've shot dozens of rolls of it at this stage. And I would like to get that kind of level of familiarity with other color films, which is why I'm trying to shoot a lot of Vision 3 500T this year, as much as Kodak are trying to stop me from doing that. Um, but yeah, I think it does hold a lot more potential
yeah.
than what Phoenix itself necessarily is right now. Um, Whenever the successor to Phoenix comes around, I'm very excited to try it out. I'm hoping slash presuming I'll get an opportunity to do that. Um, and
Yeah.
I'm very excited to see what Harman do. Like I said in my first video, they went from basically, if you think about it, Ilford XP2 to Phoenix in a year. Imagine what they could do with another 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
Obviously, it does get significantly more complicated. There's this idea in anything, the 80-20 rule. 80% of the results come with 20% of the effort. And the last 20% of getting things perfect takes 80% of the effort. So I imagine things might be a bit slower. You might not see such monumental improvements in reality, but I'm hopeful and they're definitely committed to the project.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope, and I'm pretty optimistic in regard to the amount of film that they've hopefully sold, and the way they've been marketing it, I think has been really good. I guess people who are interested in more of our thoughts on that can go back and watch our video. So maybe what we can just quickly go over is what we would like to see in the next iteration of it. I think I might have glossed over this in my video, but basically it does feel like that 80-20, like it's almost there, but maybe just the halation, I think for me was one thing, and the contrast and just kind of that punchiness and dynamic range. So the areas of improvement are mainly there for me. Is there anything else you think could be a good Phoenix 2 or sequel?
So the halation is a big thing that puts a
Yeah.
lot of people off with a lot of kind of shots, and it's the same with Cinestill 400D. A lot of people seem to just not like halation at daytime. At nighttime, it seems to be more accepted, whether that's because of Cinestill 800T or because it just suits the higher contrast, bright and dark kind of look a bit better.
Hmm.
But I think the biggest thing Harman could do would be to give us an orange mask in the
Yeah.
base, both from the dye impurity kind of angle, but also for scanning. Like the
Yes, you're
biggest
right.
difference between a good Phoenix roll and a bad Phoenix roll is how you scan it. DSLR scanning, some flatbeds, to an extent, an Aritsu, I can't even remember because I don't do lab scans. One of the Noritsu or the Frontier is just really bad at scanning Phoenix, and other
Hmm.
methods are absolutely fantastic. I mean, I know people personally who've tried it on my recommendation and hated the results because they've gotten atrocious lab scans. And then I've gone and offered to rescan the film for them, and they're like, oh, this is actually a pretty good film.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
crunchy, high contrast, limited dynamic range, and whatever, but it gives a more representative look.
it does. It does. It's a
Um,
huge bottleneck, I
and
think.
with an orange mask, it would be a lot more amenable to lab scanning in a more normal way, and that would also have effects on the contrast and dynamic range. Maybe not the exposure latitude, but it would make it a bit more manageable, kind of rein it in a little bit.
Yeah. If anything, I think if they had that from the beginning, which of course it's not as easy as it seems, that would have had more people coming back and buying more rolls, I think. But in the long run, it probably makes sense that they put out what they could, and it did have this quirkiness to it. It caused people to think deeply and experiment and realize, hey, scanners matter for this reason, and they still
Yep.
supported Harman, which I think is a great thing. And I'd be really excited when, if and when that eventually takes the next step. I'd love to review some. So Harman, if you're listening, yeah,
I don't know when this chat will end up going live, but I am going to go and see some of them in a few weeks. So
yeah, no, that'll be really cool. And yeah, because like you said, you've got people dropping out like Fujifilm, and we just want film to stay alive for
yeah,
future generations as well.
yeah,
Sorry,
and I know
Harman.
we have the Orwo branded films, the Wolfen NC 400 and 500, which I'm pretty sure is just the same as Lomo Color 92. Like the scope and availability of those films is getting lower because it seems like lomography are moving more and more towards just direct to customer sales. They have the logistics network to support that, and I'm seeing less and less lomography stuff in stock in shops. But it always seems to be in stock on their website, like they're prioritizing their own sales, whether that's for profit reasons or whatever. But I feel like it's harming the kind of awareness of their products. If people don't see them in the shops, they're not really aware that they're options, so they're not going to go and look for them on the website. And so, in that sense, it almost feels like it doesn't matter if lomography are producing as much film as they were 5 years
Mm,
ago if people aren't seeing it.
you're
So it
right.
makes the effective players like Light Lens Lab, whatever their brand is, or Harman Photo coming out a bit more impactful.
It just feels to me also that lomography hasn't been as active since COVID for some reason. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it seemed like they used to really do a lot more in terms of marketing and community incentives and launches and stuff like that. It seemed to
Definitely.
slow down a little
The
bit.
last big thing they had was Lomo Turquoise, I think,
Yeah. But that was
and then the Lomo
rehashed.
92 film.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Wasn't Turquoise already a product and they kind of relaunched it? Because
Yes,
I
there was
think,
a different turquoise
yeah,
like 10 years ago or something like
yeah, a
that.
different version. I remember we used to sell it back when I worked at the camera store around, yeah, almost
Okay.
10 years ago. And it was
And
very
then it felt
much
like for a
loved.
year or so after that, it was mostly just them outputting different versions of their cameras.
I think it'll be an exciting 2025 for film in general. And with these announcements just coming out of nowhere, like Light Lens Lab, I for one am really excited. But what I'd like to talk about more is just going back to a personal standpoint with YouTube, with creativity, and just
Okay.
for example, what are you looking forward to in 2025 in terms of your DIY, experimentation, testing, science stuff, YouTube? What do you have coming up?
Some of the things I have worked on over the last while are looking at different types of rodinal. You think that different developers should be the same if they're said to be the same. And there are some surprising differences, some of which are advertised, some of which aren't, or they're visible in the safety data sheet if you know what to look for, but they
Yeah.
aren't like written on the bottle, so most people won't realize the difference there. And I've got a new favorite road now out of that.
Okay.
Some of the things I want to look at are pushing the vision films and doing a general exposure latitude test. One of my upcoming videos is a sponsored thing where um, don't know if they want me to say who just yet because I don't know when this will go live. But they've given me a bunch of ECN2 film, so I'm going to compare the exposure latitude to the main stills films because it's
Hmm.
supposed to be better. So I want to see, can you actually underexpose, say, 500T more than Portra 400 and get a usable image? And if so, that could be one of the things that justifies the extra cost and effort of ECN2 development because it's reached a point now where the ECN2 film has gotten you know, not more expensive than the stills film, but if you factor in the higher cost of ECN2 dev, it's not really worth it on a cost basis anymore unless you mix your own ECN2 chems at home for
Yeah.
most people. I also want to have a look at properly pushing them because I have a friend who's working really hard on playing around with all the cinema films in college, and he's found that you need to say push 2.5 to 3 stops or overdevelop 2.5 to 3 stops when you push 500T to 1,000. So you don't
Right.
just push top for best results and all this kind of thing because of the different contrast profiles of the ECN2 developer versus the C41 developer. And there's a bit of precedent for that, but there are these kind of things I want to look at. One of
Yeah.
my other series that is very useful, I guess, but definitely not an entertaining video series is the chemical safety stuff. Like a
Hmm.
big part of my job is chemical waste management at a
Yeah.
university level. So one of the things I want to break into is finally find a reasonable way to approach color stuff there. Like
Yeah.
talking about the black and white chems is fine. It's time consuming, but it's easy work to do by comparison. Finding a way to talk about like the ridiculous amount of information of how to safely use and dispose of a color kit at home when like the safety data sheet is nearly 100 pages long for a 2 bath kit, it's a tremendous amount of work, and I'm trying to find a way to make that viable. So
Yeah.
I'm saying that now as a way to kind of push myself to do it this year because I do want to get it out early summer if I can. But yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff down the line, and gear videos because that's the sexy stuff that brings people in.
Gear is fun. Well, it's on record now. So
Yeah,
another thing you're dealing with is differences within, regional laws and councils and stuff like that. At least here, that's a factor to
yeah.
consider as well. Sorry, we had to
Mm-hmm.
cut a little bit there, but I was going to ask in terms of gear, you do have your pre-existing series that you mentioned on the chemical safety thing, which I think is really cool, something no one else is doing. But of course, like anyone else, you enjoy the actual physicality side of photography and cameras and lenses. Is there any particular gear that you're excited to play with coming up soon that you can talk about? Like you said something about the Rolly SL or some like stuff that you might have behind
Oh,
you
the
there.
SL66. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that thing is basically walking broken camera. One of the dark slides in one of my magazines has instructions on how to cock the shutter so you don't blow it up. Like
Yeah.
those cameras are hilariously fragile. That thing
Mm.
has been repaired a few times in the couple of years that I've owned it now.
Yeah.
Um, I recently was using the Godox IM30 flash.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
was sent a copy of this to have a look at, and that was very fun to play around with. I love it. It's got very fast recharge. It's very powerful. It's surprisingly compact for the power that it has, and it works on anything, either with the hot shoe or a sync cable. But the review was so well received by the Godox distributor who sent it to me that they've sent me two more to look at. So Godox released three more
I am
flashes in a
20.
couple of weeks after that. I am 20 and 22,
Yeah.
and then the IM 32 or IA
Yeah.
32. And then I'm getting one of the smaller ones and the 32 as well to have a look at. So I'm looking forward to doing a pair of videos. I kind of decided like 2 hours before we started this that I'm just going to do two separate videos launching probably on the same day or within a couple of days of each other. So that's very fun. On the film side, mainly just working with 500T at the moment.
Hmm.
I have a couple of rolls left that I had lying around, and I still have my bulk roll back there that I need to start spooling down. I've got some Delta 100 in one of my bulk loaders. I need to get that out, get the 500T in there. I've been mostly shooting ECN2 stuff lately, which has been fun, as well
Yeah.
as Phoenix. Phoenix cross-processed in ECN2 is a blast. I love that. It's so much better. I said in one of my videos that pretty much the worst thing you can do with Phoenix, in my opinion, is shoot it at 200 like you're told to and develop it in C41 like you're told to. Feels like you either get more character or higher performance, whether you push or pull it or cross process it almost anyway. That's a bit of hyperbole, but part of that is because I know that Phoenix looks quite good in ECN2, and I personally think it looks a lot better than at least box speed C41 development. The main reasons I've been doing all this ECN2 cross processing, especially with Phoenix and the like, is just because the ECN2 chems have a very short shelf life compared to C41 chems. I do all my own development just for convenience and cost reasons. Developing's pretty expensive here. I think it's pretty expensive for you guys as well, especially outside of regular C41. Like, it was
Hmm.
only last summer that you were able to get like a C41 push in Ireland. That wasn't a thing before. So, the options were very limited.
Yeah.
But because I'm generally overexposing Phoenix to like 125 to 140, depending on if I'm using a camera with half stops or third stops, that gives me the opportunity to decide pretty much when I go to develop it if I'm going to do C41 or ECN2. So I kind of just do more ECN2 with it right now because the chems don't last as long and I feel like I'm getting more use out of them. That I can just use those chems before they go bad, whereas the C41 stuff lasts a bit longer. For me, a lot of what I do, I have to use fresh chems a lot of the time, so I try and get as much use out of the perfectly good but not completely new chems whenever I have them lying around, which I often do. I try to like batch my development video stuff together.
Yeah.
Like I'm quite open that I try to bulk record in advance when I can. So like over the last couple of weeks, I did a bunch of C41 development stuff that's going to do videos. Like one of them might not be released until the end of the summer, but it just means that I'm getting the use out of those kims and not wasting them, which is, bad for the environment as well as my wallet if I have to do that all the time. One of the other
Yeah.
projects I want to get back to in terms of development over the summer, because I kind of have to do it over the summer, is pushing Delta 3200 and T-Max 3200 a lot. The best I've gotten so far with consistent results has been Delta 3200 at 51,000, which has
Wow.
been pretty good so far. I'll send you a picture if you wouldn't mind including it. It came
Yeah,
out
absolutely.
shockingly well. People have kind of refused to believe in some cases that it's from 51,000. It is medium format, so it's not as bad. But I remember Attic Darkroom did a video years ago with T-Max 3200, and he got it to like barely 200,000, but like 100,000 was somewhat consistent depending on the scene. So I want to do a video where I talk about this, the factors that go into making a shot that will work well when you push. So it's educational rather than just I push
Yes.
Delta 3200 to whatever,
Yeah,
because I
because
don't
it's
want to
a
step on Attic Darkroom's toes too much, that kind of thing.
fair enough.
Um, but if I can get this up to like 100K, consistently explain what kind of shots work better for pushing film,
Yeah,
and then do it in
contrast
35
has
mil,
to be a
that would be fun.
consideration, I imagine, like the contrast of the scene that you're shooting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's already a push, like a 1.5 stop push or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's only native EI 1000, ISO
EI
1000.
1000, okay, not 800. Yeah, that'll be cool.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
the Delta, I think, is 1000 and T Max 3200 is 800. Or the
yeah,
other way
yeah.
around. One of them is 800.
It
Yeah.
does create confusion out there sometimes with developing and like, oh, if I shot it at 3200, am I using the recipe for pushing, or is it the box, recipe on massive depth
Yeah.
chart and all that?
And
And then
that's it. When I'm
yeah,
looking at this stuff, like if I rated it 12,000, that's not a two stop push, it's a 3.5 stop push. So it makes the difference more extreme there and that kind of thing.
yeah.
And there are
Well,
some other things I want to play around with over the summer, but some of them are in the very early stages and they might get pushed back until next year potentially.
awesome. Yeah, looking forward to seeing what you come up with. And I know you'll be good at explaining things like that, the push processing, I think, better than anyone else. At least when I'm concerned, I go on one of your videos and I get a better understanding of processing,
Okay.
nerd speak.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Something I think I probably should invest in is like a Wacom tablet because my graphic design skills are zero. And it would help with actually producing the graphics for this kind of thing. If I could do like screen recordings where I annotate on them, it might be a
Oh,
bit
yeah.
easier. I mean, like
Oh, yeah. So
the
like when
kind
you
of things I
have
need to think about.
the little drawings that show up as you talk about things on the
Yeah, when I'm
screen.
talking
Yeah.
about the structures
Yeah.
of the dyes or the color layers, just to focus on and highlight different things, it might be a bit easier. Yeah,
Yeah. Full on chemistry lesson. That'd be really good. Well,
definitely.
tell me a little bit more about your plans for the channel, like in terms of the creative side of things, because I do see that you travel a lot. Like you seem to be on a trip. I guess maybe a certain part of last year you were traveling a lot.
Yeah.
Are you going to factor more of that into your YouTube, like showing a bit more of those personal kind of maybe not necessarily vlog, but like the personal side of things and a bit of that creative side?
I think about this a lot. I
Yeah.
have a, I mean, okay, if you know me at all, like of course I have a spreadsheet for tracking all these things and everything's color coded and categorized. And the travel videos tend to be very low priority because I
Hmm.
mostly do them for me. And I find that I can only do so many videos. I have a full-time job. I don't have the skills to have a super efficient production workflow. Like one of the things that helps me is I'm always here in this room in this chair. So the lighting and the settings for the video are always dialed in. I don't have to deal with like grading log footage or worrying about audio levels outside or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, but because I want to focus on being useful and a resource essentially with what I do, all the stuff like, you know, how to load whatever camera might not be as useful as explaining the safety of a new black and white film developer. So I'm constantly playing that game of utility versus what I personally want to do. In an ideal
Hmm.
world, I'd be able to do this full time, do a video every week, and then I could do the travel videos, no problem.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't intend on traveling as much as I did last year, though. Last year was particularly busy. I was in the UK 4 out of 5 weeks in March. There were 5 weekends in March last year. I was on a week and a half road trip around Montreal and Quebec with the DFBs, my guys. I went to Nuremberg for Grainy Days, Jason Kummerfeld's gallery over there. Meeting Jason, Caleb, Karen Mayoka was mind blowing.
Yeah.
And a few other trips here and there. And okay, I don't want to travel that much all the time, but I don't feel like it's the kind of thing that's super well received on my channel. So as much as I would like to do these videos, I might keep them for like the highlight trips. Like I'm going to do one eventually on the trip to Canada because
Yeah.
I took some of the best photographs I have ever taken, like unquestionably, especially with the Expand 2, like some of the panoramic sunset pictures I took. Like I don't generally praise my own work. I think my photography is broadly terrible. But I did take some pictures I'm very, very happy with there.
It's pretty good,
But
man, from
say
what I've been seeing.
the trip to Nuremberg, I probably won't do a video on that, or maybe I'll write it and record it and then never release it because it was just a few days in Nuremberg. It was mostly me on my own when I wasn't with Jason and Caleb and Karen, my mi amigos and Karen, and I
Yeah.
don't want it to turn into my video leeching off of them, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Even
Well,
though I spoke to them and they would be interested in seeing my take on the trip. So I don't know.
yeah.
It would in some ways be like for me if you were going through a textbook and you see like 2 or 3 pages of like photos of the author's family. That's the way I kind of view or worry about people viewing my travel videos, even though I like doing them. And I also find that from the couple that I've done, the camera that I put in the title massively affects it. So then it kind of turns into a gear thing, which is not necessarily the point of those videos. Like when I did one where I was traveling with the GFX 100S, that didn't do as well as the one where I had the Expand 2 in the thumbnail because that's a more interesting, sexy camera to most people. The kind of people who look into GFX 100Ss aren't the kind of people looking for like travel log kind of videos.
You would think the
So I'd like
GFX
to
is
do
more
them. It
searched, though.
might just not be the right move.
Fair enough. As long as you're doing what you're enjoying, and I think you're currently leaning into your strength by doing the educational stuff. Because like I said, I think you have a really good knack for that. So as long as you're feeling fulfilled enough, and you kind of filling in however much time you can put aside to do YouTube, viewers, including myself, will be like excited to see what you have. So
Well,
I
hearing that coming from someone like you means a lot. So thank you.
Oh no, I really appreciate what you do, man. And I think this was like a really good introductory chat, but there's so many things I think that we could talk about that crossed my mind already. Like you were talking about bulk developing film, and then I thought, let's talk about Argo, and there's all these things, but I don't want to like overwhelm the chat too much. So what I'd like to wrap up is just to tell the audience where they can find more of your work, where you want to direct them, anything exciting you have coming up that you haven't already mentioned.
So I go by Shaka1277 everywhere. Flickr, Instagram, YouTube, Discord. I'm in a bunch of different Discord servers, but you should be able to just shoot me a DM.
Yeah.
Instagram's probably the best place to get me. I've got a website, same name. I try to keep that kind of simple. And yeah, I'm always happy to try and help people if I can. I get a lot of like random messages about different things about developers and whatever. And if I can't help someone, I can usually kind of point them in the right direction.
Yeah. And I do notice you
But
put in quite a bit of effort to answer people's questions. And if you guys aren't aware, there's a Pushing Film Discord server. Alex is a member there, so you can hop on there if you want and put in the
yeah, the
technical
Discord is
channel.
quite an international group. We also have Jack from Ireland Analog
Yeah.
there. It's not just the Australian guys and me kind of sitting in
Yeah.
the corner shouting at people.
No, I'm sure it's a very much appreciated. And speaking of Australia, did you say you have someone here in Australia, like a relative or something?
Yeah, my brother lives over
Yeah.
there in Melbourne.
Yeah. Any plans to do a visit to Melbourne soon?
I would like to. My job makes it a bit complicated because working in university, we're kind of limited by the schedule for the teaching terms,
Yeah.
and especially given my role. I don't want to say too much, but my job is pretty much just me most of the time. So if I'm gone for a long period, which would have to be a couple of weeks if I'm going to Australia, you don't
Hmm.
go there for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
That would have implications for work. So it's something I would like to do, definitely. Um, and whenever that happens, we'll have to connect up.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you come down, we'll definitely have to hang out, make some
Yeah, or
videos, shoot some
equally if you're
film.
ever in this part of the world, for sure.
Yeah, I do want to visit there, and also plenty of other places, including Canada, that you mentioned. And I was very jealous of some of the photos you've been posting. So Yeah, man. Thanks for this chat. I'm already looking forward to the next one. And everyone, make sure to check the description of this. I'll put some of the links, including anything that you want to hand on, Alex, like any Discord groups that you're in or the Instagram, the usual stuff. So, yeah, much
Yeah, it'd be
appreciated.
great. Thank you very much. And thank you again for having me and for anyone who watches this. Yeah, really appreciate it. We'll
Thank
definitely
you.
do this again and we'll come up with a list.
Speak again soon.